This is a boat I've been waiting for a really long time. It's called the Mage, and it's the newest boat in the Alpacka raft lineup. It's kind of a hybrid between the Wolverine or the Narwhal and the Valkyrie. I've been paddling it about 12 days, both in a decked version and a self-bailer, and this video is some of my first impressions. The first thing I noticed about this boat is when I inflated it, even on flat ground, it just rocked back and forth. And I think that's a really good illustration of this boat's stability. It looks a lot like a Wolverine on the surface. It's got a little bit more bow rocker and maybe a slightly longer stern, but it looks like a Wolverine. It's not until you flip it over that you can really start to see the big differences. And the main difference is the floor. The floor sits a few inches deeper than the side tubes, and that creates this edge and zone that gives you some secondary stability. And that's really the biggest difference between a Narwhal or a Wolverine. This has less primary stability, but it has a ton more secondary stability. And that took me a kind of a while to understand what it really means. So in a Narwhal, you have a ton of primary stability. And when you're paddling, it often feels like you're stable, stable, stable. And as soon as you start to go on edge, you almost can't even feel it. You get very little feedback from the river until it's too late. It's a binary, very on or off feeling. You're either stable or you're not stable. Secondary stability is no longer on or off. It is more of a transition zone. So in the Mage, you might start to feel tipping initially, and if you're used to feeling that in a Narwhal, you might think you're going over, but you actually have time. So you start to go on edge, and you can still be stable even when it's on edge, which gives you time to put in corrective strokes, but it also allows you to carve a lot better. It allows you to use the currents in the river to move the boat, a lot more maneuverability, and it's just a lot more fun. But it does take some time to figure it out. There's a learning curve to it. And I think I've certainly swam more in the Mage on rivers that if I was in my Narwhal, I probably would not have swam. But the flip side of that, it's just more fun. And as you start to get the hang of it, you start to be able to do higher performance moves. You can ferry much easier. You can surf. You can skip out of holes a lot better and cross complicated currents and eddy lines much easier than you can in a Narwhal. The boat's just way more rigid from front to back. So if you've ever gone into like a hole or punched a wave and you can feel flexing or twisting in a pack craft, that's diminished a lot in a Mage, which is a very nice feeling. You'll especially notice this when you go off of a ledge drop or you're hitting big waves. The boat just resurfaces so much faster, and it tends to skip over things and maintain its momentum and keep moving forward instead of getting stuck. And that's a huge advantage. And the other place you'll see a performance increase in this boat is its rollability. I took this boat down to a pool session a couple of days ago, and pretty much anyone who was a kayaker who had a solid roll could jump in this boat and roll it. I think if you can roll a Wolverine, no problem, you're gonna be able to roll this boat. So another improvement in this boat that's not necessarily performance related, but it is related to how the floor integrates, is the interior rigging. I really like this new setup. The full length floor is separate from the inflatable seat. And so that allows you to maintain the rigidity of the whole boat, but also adjust the height of your seat independently. It's a personal preference, but you can feel different handling characteristics based on how high or low you are in the seat. When you're lower, for me, I tend to feel more stable, but maybe don't have quite as much leverage to put in powerful strokes. When I'm higher, I feel like I get improved handling, but it comes at the expense of maybe a little bit of stability. The secondary seat also just gives you more interior room, specifically beneath your legs. So if you want to run a lap bag or a deck bag inside your boat, you can run it underneath there. There's a little bit more vertical room behind your seat, which is nice if you want to run a Sockdolage or seat bag back there, but also just gives you more flexibility. If you want the performance increases that come from not having a bow bag, and you can run a seat bag and a lap bag, you can keep the bow dry. I'm really a big fan of the way that this boat rigs. I think it's a lot more comfortable, but it's a lot more adjustable. You can get this boat tuned to exactly how you want it. So I think the big question to answer is, which is the best boat? And I think that really depends. If you're just starting out today and don't have intentions to get into really class 3 or more challenging whitewater, I think the Narwhal still remains a really good boat. It's lighter and it's still very stable. If you want to get into class 3 and maybe eventually into class 4 and see yourself improving your skills, I think the Mage is really a good option. And if you come from a hardshell background, there's no doubt that the Valkyrie is the best boat. It's the highest performance. Anything that the Mage can do, the Valkyrie can do better. And there's only a few scenarios where that's not really totally true. The first scenario, I think, is sizing. The Valkyrie has a pretty narrow window. I'm 215 pounds and I'm in a large Valkyrie and I still feel like it's too small. It's just not a super comfortable boat, especially because it's pretty narrow and it really puts a lot of pressure on my hips and my lower legs. Also, if you're small, a Valkyrie just doesn't really work. I have a friend that's 4'11", and in a small Mage, she fits really well. And that's just really not possible in a Valkyrie right now. So the second area where the Mage is an obvious winner is if you want a self-bailer. I was able to paddle the self-bailer in Idaho this summer for about 5 days, and I had not paddled a self-bailer in quite a long time, and I forgot just how fun it is. A self-bailer is way more comfortable, and when it's hot, it's an awesome boat to paddle. They're so much easier to self-rescue into. If you prefer a self-bailer, it's no contest. This is the boat to get. The last area where I think this boat might be better than the Valkyrie is in the backcountry. Even though it's a bigger volume boat, it's still 3 to 4 pounds lighter than a Valkyrie, depending on your build options. And it also packs down quite compact into a backpack, so it's easier to carry, but it's also just more comfortable when you're out on a multi-day trip. It's more comfortable in the cockpit. It's easier to pack cargo inside of it. And I also feel like the Valkyrie is a little bit more fiddly. If your weight is too far forward or too far back, it changes the way that the boat handles. And I just find it fiddly. There's like a much higher learning curve to getting that boat dialed every time. And the Mage just feels a little bit more forgiving in those ways. And those are the types of trips that I really enjoy. I love multi-day trips, backcountry trips. And so I think that this boat in general will be more comfortable for me. All right, so those are my first impressions of the Alpacka Mage. This is a boat I'm really excited to add to my quiver. I feel like it fills the gap between the Narwhal and the Valkyrie perfectly and really fits my paddling style. I'll be releasing some new products this year that I think will work really well with the Mage. And if you have any questions or comments about this review, or maybe I missed something, feel free to drop a comment here, or you can always reach out to me on my website at sockdologyequipment.com.